what we'll look at today is a little bit about what STARTS is. Some of you might know what we are, so sorry if I'm repeating this, but I think other people might not know. We look at the way we work, the systemic approach that STARTS uses. I'll take you briefly through some research on social capital, because this would be looking at intersections of our systemic approach, the concept of social capital, and how that then relates to food security. So at the end, we'll come back, we'll tie it all together into the food security. So STARTS, as some of you might know, it's a service for the treatment and rehabilitation of torture and trauma survivors. We've been around since 1988. We started with about 6 people, and now we are about 160. We have offices in Liverpool, in Karama, Auburn and Blacktown, and also in rural and regional areas in Wagga, Coffs Harbour, Illawarra and Newcastle. So it's now quite a large organisation. And mission of STARTS is to develop and implement ways to facilitate the healing process of survivors of torture and trauma. And that means working with people, working with individuals, families and communities who have survived torture and trauma in the context of refugee experience, but also working with service providers and enabling service providers to work with our client group. So as we said, we work with people who are from refugee and refugee-like backgrounds. Refugee-like backgrounds means that we work with asylum seekers as well as people who are in Australia on permanent visas as refugees. We are a statewide service. Now this is just a quick look at at the end of 2013, the global refugee population was 16.7 million according to UNHCR, and only about 1% of those were resettled. Situation is changing, and as you know, the situation in Iraq and in Syria has changed, and I think numbers of refugees will be higher again. The biggest refugee-producing countries in 2013 were Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Sudan, and I would imagine that would remain the same for the rest of this year. The developing countries hosted 4/5 of the world's refugees. And Pakistan, at the time when this was written, hosted the largest number of refugees worldwide. Now, people who come to Australia, this is just briefly, again, we've got two components of how people come to Australia to seek protection. One is offshore, where people apply and they're granted permanent visa, they settle in Australia, and they receive a whole host of services. Much more attention in the last year, at least, has been given to people who come to Australia as on boats as what do they call them? Illegal maritime arrivals. I hate that phrase, I have to say. People apply for protection and might be granted protection. You can see the offshore countries where people have come from, and you can see below the countries that STARTS has seen people from. Now, more to the point, has anyone seen this before? Okay, that's good, not too many people. STARTS has a couple of clinical psychologists who really love diagrams, and so you will see a couple of diagrams. This one basically conceptualizes how STARTS understands the experiences of our clients. Every family that we see is individual in their coping strategies, in their life experiences, in how they exist as a family. So that you've got a family there, and that signifies the individual nature of every person that we see. People also come to us with the impact of traumatic experiences, which then interacts with the impact of challenges of resettlement and the normal life cycle issues. And now, when we talk about food security, a lot of the food security discussion is for people who might not have come here as refugees or migrants, the food security in the general community. So the issues for refugees, the issues are multiplied. As you can see, this intersection is where our clients come from. All of that then happens on the context of Australian environment and things that happen around us, the policies, the legislation, the reactions of the community to our clients. All of those things impact on our clients and on their life experience in Australia and settlement. Now, also international events, of course, impact. And for example, if you have a family from Iraq here in Australia, they're from Mosul, people from Mosul have suddenly found themselves as refugees in Kurdistan. Family in Australia might have to send a significant amount of their income to support family overseas. And that means that the potential for poverty for people living here in Australia is that much higher. Some of the things, these are just some of the things that people have come through, some of the things that our clients have experienced. The basic summary of it, that people have experienced direct experiences of torture and imprisonment, of loss and separation, exposure to war, and witnessing torture and killing, as well as insecurity and exposure to hunger, exposure to deprivation and loss. The whole concept of fleeing, that people live in secrecy without saying goodbye, they don't know what they're going to, don't take any belongings, lose everything behind. So that's what people come with. Refugee camps, not much better. Once you might find yourself in a refugee camp, exposure to starvation, disease, overcrowding, poverty, lack of schooling, lack of work opportunities, and all of those feelings of distrust and fear and helplessness. Once people come here, go back, sometimes people get told you should be grateful to be here. And yet then people face a whole lot of challenges of resettlement that you can see there, and tying it all back to food security, all of those things have potential to impact on the food security. We've talked about marginalised populations and issues of housing, of schooling, financial problems, looking after family here, but also looking after family overseas and sending significant amount of income overseas. Fear and distrust of authorities, knowledge how to navigate systems, all of those things impact on people's ability to settle and access food. On the other hand, and that's going back to those strengths, refugee journey can bring people together. And you might have heard about the South Sudanese Lost Boys. It was a group of boys who banded together in Kakuma refugee camp. They were without parents. And they banded together for protection, to look after each other. There were some girls as well. They get called Lost Boys a lot. I know a couple of girls. And once they're here in Australia, they continue to support each other. And these strong social networks, and we'll look at social capital in a minute, is something that enables people to survive in difficult times. Surviving refugee experience can build resilience and resourcefulness and help people learn how to work the systems. And all of us would have experienced that to an extent. And there's also a strong drive for survival. Now, I'll take you to what we call a systemic approach at starts, and I'll take you through all of those together. There's another diagram here. Now, what this means is that STARTS believes that trauma impacts on all levels of social system. Exposure to refugee experience impacts on all levels of social system, from individual to family to community. And it wasn't until I started talking to Liz that I realized how some of the interventions that we undertake on all different levels of social system, that we didn't necessarily talk about them as have to do with food security. It's only after talking to you, Liz, that I realized, well, everything that we do is connected to food security. Everything that we do is integrally connected with it. So, for example, when we work on individual level, we provide people with counseling and we provide people with somatic therapies. That helps people regain sense of trust, of meaning and self-efficacy. That means people are better able to engage with their environment. They're better able to access the resources available to them. They're better able to negotiate the new society and therefore look after themselves and their families. They're better able to connect with the support systems. Those outcomes might be intangible, but they're all required to engage with the society and reduce social isolation, to access employment, to access the social resources. On the individual level, we also provide something called enterprise facilitation, which means helping people start their own business. Again, source of income for people. A lot of refugees have come to Australia and they find it difficult to find employment due to English, due to exposure to racism, due to lack of knowledge of how Australian systems work. Yet they might have skills and strengths and abilities that if they could only build on those, they might be capable of making income for them and their families. And so Des, who some of you might have met, who is working with the community kitchens that provided quite a lot of this food, Des is our enterprise facilitator, and he helps people start small business. So again, enterprise facilitation, linked in with food security. On family level, we run families in cultural transition groups. And what it is we train people who are bicultural facilitators. We train them and then we pay them to run groups with their own community. And in those groups, people look at the basic conceptual frameworks underpinning Australian society. But they look at things like budgeting, They look at things about where we can buy bulk food and we can buy cheap food. They look at how families can come together to buy bulk food and look after each other. So families in cultural transition, again, has connected with that. It also reduces family conflict, because we look at the impact of migration and settlement on families and family relationships. Stronger families are better able to look after each other. On a community level, we've done a whole lot of community development projects, which again would directly link with food security, but indirectly they also build this intangible thing called social capital, and I'll take you to the social capital in a minute. But some of the projects which are directly relevant are community gardens, and we're involved with the health promotion unit in a number of community gardens, particularly with Karen community. There's a garden at Fairfield High School, there's one at Willowwood, and one at Chester Hill that we're involved in. We were also involved in helping set up an employment agency called Bright Employment, which provides work in agricultural opportunities for refugees and asylum seekers with work rights. Bright Employment has been started by someone who was a merchant banker and who has decided to invest a lot of his own money into supporting refugees. And he started this company. He's now employing about 200 people working in agricultural industry in Tasmania in particular, and Queensland as well. It would be interesting to actually have him talk at some stage. So in terms of building the community, other things that we help people with is, again, social enterprises around community kitchens, and English classes where people, again, you learn English, you learn how to find a job, you learn how to negotiate the system, how to access the resources that you need to make your way in Australia. And then going further to supra system, to mainstream society and institutions, we also recognize the importance of structural change and a provision of policy input to governments on the topics that are relevant to our clients are very important to us. So, how are we going with time? Yeah, 5 minutes? I'll take you to the evidence base. My work is in community development, and why we think that community development is incredibly important when working with torture and trauma survivors. A lot of people would have heard about STARTS as a counselling service. But we are much more than that. Yes, we are that, but we are more than that. Judith Herman argues that the main consequences of trauma are disempowerment and disconnection. Now, what is community development if it isn't creating of connections and if it isn't about empowerment? Therefore, recovery from trauma cannot occur in isolation of people from each other. Secondly, organised violence that most of our clients were exposed to as state terrorism leads to breakdown in relationships, leads to community fragmentation and mistrust in each other and in the authorities. The person who I have here is a person who postulated on state terrorism and was killed for his work in 1989 in El Salvador. Ignacio Martin Barreau was a social psychologist and a Jesuit priest. And organized violence and state terrorism actually directly target, with individuals you will get depression, you will get anxiety, you will get post-traumatic stress disorder. With communities, you will get this whole thing of fragmentation, of breakdown of communities. You will get this whole lack of trust. And that then God starts thinking on how do we look at these relationships between people? How do we measure the quality of relationships between people? Because it is where trauma hits. The trauma hits at the relationships between people. And that's where we came across the concept of social capital. Because what it is, social capital is about social relationships, about connections, networks, and resources that exist within a community, about trust and cooperation, which are the qualities of those relationships. And they're exactly the things that exposure to state terrorism and organized violence hit. So we've partnered with the UNSW Center for Refugee Research, and we've done research into social capital and how to measure the meaning, the importance, the different aspects of social capital within refugee communities. Now, there's quite a lot of what we've discovered, and with very little time to go, you can keep going. I'll take you to then what we've discovered in our work. We've had a working definition of what is strengthening social capital. We assume that because we want to strengthen the relationships between people and enable people to develop positive social connections and networks, that will enable people to address the problems they have in common and to enhance their well-being through better access to resources. So that's how we defined the social capital in collaboration with a number of refugee leaders from refugee communities. It was a participatory research process where we had a whole lot of community leaders come together and work on this whole thing of what is social capital. And then the way we looked at it, there's this visual representation. You have all these resources in a community, and resources could be the food bank, resources could be Centrelink, resources could be activities, employment. But if people don't have this motor, the motor is the relationships between people. That's what pulls everything together. So if people don't have trust, if people don't have relationships, if they don't have capacity to engage with each other, then it's very difficult to use those social resources. So social capital is about those things that are between, the thing that brings everything together, the glue. The things we found is, in literature, we have this thing called bonding, bridging, and linking social capital, the three types. The bonding social capital was about, press hard. It's about connections with people who are part of your own social group. So people within the refugee community who come together. Now, war trauma, again, state terrorism and organized violence affect those relationships that people have within their own community. But those social connections are essential because they provide support mechanisms that are essential for getting by in life. You know, if you run out of food, then you're going to go and ask someone else who is in your social network to lend you some food, or you're going to ask them for some money. So if people have those relationships within their own social network, those relationships can keep them going. However, people also need to engage in bridging outside of their own community to access other resources that might not be available within the community. And that's where this bridging social capital comes in. They're horizontal connections that happen across the society, and they're also incredibly important. And there needs to be a balance between this bonding social capital and a bridging social capital, because people need to be able to relate to those within their own community and those outside. Now, why is social capital important? I shall be skipping a whole lot of other things that we've discovered, but there has been research into social capital and refugee and communities and food security. So let me, I have far too much, I think. STARTS will have, actually next year we are going to have a whole day workshop. I'll show you this first. STARTS will have a whole day workshop on social capital and how to measure social capital. So you'll find it on our website and you'll be able to access this. Now, food security, we've looked at availability, access, utilization, and then the stability, all of those things. Now, go back to, all right, some of the research on social capital and food security, there was quite a lot done in Africa, and finding was that in terms of financial hardship and food shortages and severe illnesses, studies in Africa have shown that social capitals within families makes a big difference in their ability to cope with adverse events. So strong relationships between people will make the ability to cope with illness and with drought and all of the other things that might affect them much better. Another review of literature was done on productivity, social capital, and food security in Nigeria. They found that it was a complex relationship, but that the social capital has a potential to decrease poverty, influence uptake of new technology, which makes the productivity better, and enhance welfare. Then there was a couple of studies, there's 4 studies here from the US. In Central Texas, they found that individual level indicators of social capital were positively associated with higher intake of fruit and vegetables in Central Texas, which was interesting. High levels of social capital were also negatively associated with the risk of malnutrition amongst African Americans, as well as another sample from Connecticut that high social capital at individual and neighborhood levels, so that bonding social capital, was also positively associated with a decreased risk of hunger. And then a 4-nation study that's looked at nutritional status among children in Peru, Vietnam, Ethiopia, and in India. The perceptions of strong social capital in mothers was also positively associated with greater nutritional status among children. So there's clearly research. I haven't found much in terms of Australian research, and I think I need to do quite a bit more on that. I know, Luke, shaking your head, nothing much. And I've got a sign that says finish. Just a couple of examples. I want to give you an example of an organization of an organization that's done a lot of good work, and it illustrates how some of this community building contributes to food security. Australian Afghan Hassanian Youth Association is an Afghan grassroots organization in Auburn. They've existed since 2006. They have now 3 staff members. We've helped them become an incorporated charity. We've also helped them access food bank. And now they deliver food packages. They have developed a cookbook. They have a women's cooking group that's using the commercial kitchen. They do IPA vouchers, the Telstra vouchers, so do all sorts of things. So by working with one community organization, by working on their strengthening, they were able to then continue providing for their own community and by strengthening their community leadership. To conclude, this is that systemic approach yet again, which you've seen already. My conclusions have gone. I just wanted to tell you that the concept of social capital is incredibly relevant to refugee communities because it deals directly with the impact of trauma on this, on community level. The community development interventions are needed to build social capital. That stronger social capital appears to enhance the food security. Therefore, we should be looking at further research in Australian context on the connections between social capital and food security. That even when interventions are not called food security interventions, they all have a potential to enhance food security, and we all know that. And that it's important that interventions operate on all levels of social system. And again, that resonates with what I've heard from Red Cross today, about working from a small program level all the way up to social policy level. So there you go, that's from me from today, very fast. Thank you.